it's not prima facie. It's not in the Torah that Judaism includes politics, etc. This is where it happens. These episodes are where it happens.
But when they said choose for yourself leaders, I mean that's very much definitely something in the Torah.
Well, if anything, yeah. There's if anything, what happens
there was
in the Torah,
politics.
Yeah, and the Torah is against politics. So the Shmuel's creating a king was essentially in response to a call by the nation that he disagreed with, and it's viewed continuously as calamitous. So I think if there's a view of the Torah about relationship to leadership, it's a negative one. Most of the kings of the book of Malachim are viewed negatively, and the political plays of and the real politics. So the alliance with Egypt is condemned. All sorts of stuff. So I think it's an interesting but complicated story. And it's worth another time. There's some really good books on it and stuff. But this is, to some degree, the rabbinic life that occurs, that we now know as Judaism, evolves out of what we're going to discuss now.
Mm-hmm.
So remember that the Jewish leadership was split into several camps at the time. In
the Second Temple, we're talking the Pharisees were the dominant intellectual religious group.
No, they weren't dominant. They were probably so the political leadership.
They certainly had the allegiance of most of the masses.
Not clear.
Who would have more allegiance? Certainly not the Sadducees.
Well, the leadership of the people were apparently in the hands of the Sadducees at the time.
Which were who ran the temple cult?
There were different groups. There were the nobility and other such things. But again, and then there were lots of in the revolt against Rome, we have descriptions of at least 5 messianic armed camps. Right, so in other words,
Second Temple or
Yochanan, all Second Temple.
Second Temple, yeah.
Yochanan of Giskala, of Gush Chalav, all these people who described in Josephus were charismatic.
Jesus of Nazareth. Well, he was 40 years before.
It would fit into the
the charismatic King Redeemer.
He was not foreign to what was going on.
Yeah.
And in fact, the Gemara says that there were as many crucified people in the time of the Roman rule as there were who left Egypt. So, 600,000. So it's like the movie Spartacus, I suppose.
Yeah.
Where everybody who seemed to be in disobedience of the Romans found themselves hanging from a
cross.
Hanging from a cross. In fact, there's a Gemara that says that the wood of a cross is like a holy object. So obviously there were many righteous people who were viewed as. So again, this is it's much more complicated world, and we do have a lot of texts about this from all the different camps. Again, Josephus and all that. It's very interesting. Again, but what we're trying to do here, we do in honoring your program here as a Torah hour rather than a history hour. We want to talk about the views of Chazal, the views of the rabbis. So again, they seem to take a very leftist position here. They were opposed to the rebels. They say that oh, by the way, I want to point out one thing. You mentioned about that he was about 40 years before.
Mm-hmm.
So the Gemara actually says in Yuma that for 40 years already before the destruction, things were not right. That the Gorel didn't work out right. That various miracles.
What's the Gorel?
The lottery that happened on Yom Kippur. That various I don't know what you would call them. They're not magical, but various signs, clear signs from God that happened in the temple stopped happening. So for 40 years, interestingly.
After Jesus was put to death on a cross.
Or, yeah, I'm not sure that, I'm not entirely convinced that these rabbis fully aware of.
Yeah.
I think he was just one of many.
They probably didn't realize he was God's son who'd come to earth to save them from their sins, and they'd only believe in him, they'd not perish but have eternal life.
You're going to get kicked out of shul again.
They probably weren't cognizant of this opportunity.
You're going to get kicked out of shul again. So for the good or the bad, they do use that number, which is interesting. But though one might argue, some argue the other way around, so that when Jesus predicts that at some point after his death the temple will be destroyed, there are those who would say that it was very clear already that it wasn't a big
Right.
prophecy. It was like obviously
Right.
Spain was going to win the World Cup.
Right, like Bible scholars say that was written in there after the destruction of the temple, because the earliest book of the Gospels is Mark, and it was compiled around year 70 of the Common Era, right when Jerusalem was being destroyed.
That can be for a different parsha.
Yes, when we cover the Gospels,
the special
Gospel Hour of Power.
I think they have those already. So, there's that's just interesting. Just glancing through these. So, what I wanted to point out, there's a lot of religious stuff that happens in the description of the first bite, and not in the second one. And I wanted to get to the source, but I just noticed there's a lot of narrations, both in the Midrash and the Gemara, in various places, in the first temple destruction of this hand of fire that comes out of heaven. The priests commit suicide to protect the temple, and they fling the keys to the temple up to heaven, and a hand comes out and takes it. So that kind of thing is narrated about the first temple. But in the second temple, what we have is Kamsa and Bar Kamsa.
Yeah.
What we have are everybody's condemned. They act like a jerk to a guy who's so angered that he goes and becomes an informer. He runs off to the Romans and says, "You want to see that the Jews are not loyal to you? Sacrifice bring a sacrifice," and he then put a defect in it.
Yeah.
So, and then it says the rabbis were so strict. Again, here you have it again. So this is not something you'd expect to see like in your art scroll.
Right.
So they were so strict about maintaining the usual halacha that as a result of that, it led to the destruction of the temple. And they point out the name of the Rav, who's interestingly his name is Rav Zechariah. So they use the same name as in the first temple and the second temple. But this Rav Zechariah, they say his modesty is the word they use, anvanuto, or his strictness is what leads to the destruction of the temple. So it becomes, if anything, not only is it not a religious phenomenon, but almost an anti-religious phenomenon. What he should have done, apparently, is to either take this korban, or they shouldn't have insulted Bar Kamsa in the first place. They said the rabbi sat there and didn't complain about it, and then they let him act as a collaborator in a way that brought down the temple. So why they focus on this is obviously a sign of a certain political viewpoint. And then you have the story with Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai. So the story there is that there were three wealthy people who are known to be who when the siege happened, banded together and donated all of their goods for the social welfare, the distribution of wealth, as they say. One brought, and they praised them. The Talmud said one brings food, one brings wood, and they say that was the best of all. So they're very effusive about support of these people who contributed to the welfare of Jerusalem under siege. And then they say that the Sicarii, the rebels, came and burned all the storehouses, and that led to the destruction of the temple, as we've seen, and they're condemned.
Yeah.
And then we have the story of Yochanan ben Zakkai, who is the relative of one of the rebel leaders. So he strikes a deal with this rebel leader to be able to go out and communicate with Vespasian.
Yeah.
And save at least some part of... so he sells out the city, so in Yisrael Eldad's words, but he saves some portion of the community to go onward.
Some of the Torah scholars and says, "Give me Yavna," goes after Yavna and works on what becomes the Mishnah.
Yeah. So that's kind of the way that in every story that you